The girl was already dying when she crossed the line. She did not know the exact moment her paws left Blackthorn land and touched Scarrow soil. There was no fence, no wall, nothing but an old iron marker buried under snow to say one kingdom ended and another began. But the forest knew, the wind knew, and when her body finally gave out and she skidded across the frost in her wolf form, blood painting a long red seam behind her, something in the trees went still, the way the world goes still, right before a storm remembers its own strength. One quick thing before we move on. Tap that like button and comment where you're watching from. Every like and every comment helps this story find more people. Now, let's get back into it. 3 of Garin Blackthorn's hunters were still on her trail. She could hear them before she saw them, their paws hammering the frozen ground, their breath tearing the cold air into ragged clouds. She tried to rise, her back leg would not answer her. Pain rolled through her side, where a hunter's blade had opened her ribs an hour ago, and every heartbeat pushed more warmth out of her and into the snow beneath her. "Get up," she told herself. "Finn is still out there. Get up." Her body did not listen. Her wolf form flickered, unstable, and then gave out entirely, the change dragging her back into her human shape with a violence that stole what little air she had left. She lay in the snow, human now, shivering, blood soaking through the remains of her torn dress, and understood with a strange, distant calm that this might be the place she stopped running. The hunters broke through the tree line, seconds later. "There," one of them growled, already shifting back to human just enough to speak. "She's on Scarrow land. Doesn't matter. Drag her back over the marker, and no one will ever know." "Someone already knows," said a voice that was not theirs. The forest answered that voice before the men did. Snow shifted off low branches. Somewhere close, a low growl rolled through the ground itself, deep enough that Era felt it more than heard it, vibrating up through the frozen earth and into her ribs. Torvin Ash, captain of the King's Guard, prowled out from the dark between the trees on 4 legs, 6 more wolves flanking him, hackles raised. He had been riding the border that night, as he did most nights, restless in a way he could never fully explain to anyone who asked. Behind him, moving with the unhurried, terrible patience of something that had never once needed to hurry, came the king. Kalen Draven did not shift, not yet. He walked forward on 2 legs, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair pushed back by the wind, his pale grey eyes already fixed on the 3 hunters standing over the girl in the snow. He had been riding this border for a different reason entirely. A report of Blackthorn scouts testing his lines again, nothing more. He had expected an argument about territory markers. He had not expected the smell that hit him the moment he stepped past the tree line. Blood. Not just blood, her blood, layered with something underneath it that made the wolf inside him lift its head and go utterly, dangerously still. "She's ours," the lead hunter said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence now that 6 sets of golden eyes were fixed on him. "Property of Alpha Blackthorn. She ran. We're only bringing her home." Kalen's gaze moved from the hunter to the girl on the ground. She was barely conscious, her dark hair matted with blood and melting frost, her lips a shade of blue that had no business being anywhere near living skin. Her eyes, grey, sharp even now, even half shut with pain, found his for one brief second before her body shuddered and her eyelids fell closed. Something inside Kalen's chest tore loose. He did not decide to move. He was simply moving, and the change came up through him the way a wave comes up through still water, fast and total. His shoulders widened, his spine bent, and where a king had stood a heartbeat before, there was now something far older and far less patient wearing his shape. Silver-black fur. Eyes gone from grey to a burning, molten gold. A sound came out of him that was not quite a growl, and not quite anything human words had ever bothered to name. The 3 hunters did not wait to see what came next. They ran. But it was not only the hunters who stepped back. Torvin, who had served Kalen for 11 years and had seen him lose his temper more times than he could count, felt his own paws retreat half a length across the snow before he caught himself. The other guards did the same, ears flat, tails low, every instinct in their wolf blood screaming the same warning. This is not the king you know. Do not stand in front of this. Kaelin did not chase the hunters. He let them run, because chasing them meant leaving her, and some new and terrible certainty inside him understood that leaving her, even for a moment, was no longer a thing he was capable of doing. He shifted back, breathing hard, and knelt in the snow beside the girl. Up close, the damage was worse. A blade wound along her ribs, rope burns circling one wrist, days old, half-healed and torn open again. Bruises in the shape of fingers on her arm. Whoever had held her before tonight had not been gentle, and whoever had cut her open tonight had meant to finish something. "My king," Torvin said carefully, approaching now that the wolf in Kaelin's eyes had receded enough to make speech possible. "What are your orders?" Kaelin did not answer right away. He was looking at her face, at the fine, stubborn set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness, at the frost gathering in her dark lashes, and something in his chest was rearranging itself in a way 90 years of ruling had never once prepared him for. "Don't let her leave this territory," he said finally. His voice had gone quiet, but every wolf in the clearing heard it as clearly as they had heard the growl minutes before. "Not back to Blackthorn, not anywhere. Send riders to close the northern crossings. If anyone comes asking for her, they answer to me. And the girl herself, my king, once she wakes." Kaelin lifted her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and the wrongness of that, a girl this thin, this broken, still alive at all, settled into him like a splinter he already knew he would carry for a long time. "She does not leave my territory," he said again, softer this time. The words meant less for Torvin and more for the girl herself, though she could not hear him. "Not until I understand what just happened to me the moment I saw her bleeding in my snow." He carried her back through the trees toward Iron Hollow Keep, blood from her wounds soaking warm through his sleeve with every stride. The great hall was still lit when he shouldered through the doors, a handful of servants and off-duty guards gathered near the hearth against the cold. Every one of them turned at the sound of the doors, and every one of them went still. It was not the girl in his arms that stopped them, though a bleeding, half-frozen human, carried through Iron Hollow's halls, was rare enough on its own. It was his face. Something in it had not fully come back from the forest. Gold still banked low behind his grey eyes like embers refusing to go out, and one by one, without a single order given, the wolves in that room stepped back to clear his path to the stairs. "Isolde," he said, and his voice alone was enough to send a boy sprinting for the healer's tower before the name had finished leaving his mouth. Now. He carried her up through corridors lined with the banners of kings who had ruled this hold before him, and behind him his guards exchanged glances that said, without a single word passing between them, that something in their king had shifted tonight, and it had not shifted back. Era woke to warmth, and warmth, after everything, felt like a lie her body was too tired to argue with. For 3 days she had known only cold, the cold of the forest floor, where Blackthorn's men had kept her chained between hunts, the cold of the blade that had opened her side, the cold certainty that she was going to die before she ever reached her brother again. So when she opened her eyes to a soft bed, a fire crackling somewhere nearby, and blankets that did not smell of blood or rot, her first thought was that she had finally died, and this was simply what death had decided to look like. Her second thought, sharper and far more useful, was, where is Finn? She sat up too fast. Pain flared along her ribs, dulled but not gone, and she pressed a hand to the bandages wound tight around her middle, breathing through her teeth until the room stopped tilting. "Careful," said a voice from the corner of the room. "The wound is closing, but it isn't closed." Era's head snapped toward the sound, and every muscle in her body went rigid. He was seated near the window, one boot resting against the stone sill, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She recognized him instantly, even without the wolf's shape, the man from the forest, the one whose growl had sent grown hunters running like pups. Up close, in the low firelight, he looked less like the terrifying thing she remembered from the edge of unconsciousness, and more like a man who had not slept properly in some time. "Where am I?" she said. It was not really a question. It was a demand, dressed carefully as one, because she had learned in the last several months that showing fear only fed the people who wanted to hurt you. "Iron Hollow Keep," he said. "Skaro territory. You're safe here." "I've heard that before." The words came out flatter and colder than she intended, but she did not take them back. Usually right before someone decides I'm not. Something in his expression tightened, though whether from insult or understanding, she couldn't tell yet. "I'm not Garan Blackthorn," he said, "and this is not his hold. You knew his name. My scouts found 3 of his hunters standing over you with a blade still bloody in one man's hand," he said. "I'd have to be a fool not to know whose men they were." Era studied him, cataloguing everything the way she had learned to catalogue every room, every guard, every possible way out since the night her family's hold had burned. Broad shoulders, a crown she hadn't noticed at first, simple and unadorned, resting against dark hair. Eyes the pale grey of a winter sky, watching her with a focus that felt less like a king assessing a prisoner and more like a man trying to solve something he did not yet have the pieces for. "Who are you?" she asked. "Kaelan Draven, Alpha King of Skaro." He said it plainly, without the weight most rulers dressed their names in. "And you are the reason 6 of my guards forgot how to hold their ground last night." Era's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask to be found." "No," he agreed. "But you were. And now you're going to tell me why Blackthorn's hunters were chasing you through my northern woods with clear intent to kill." She held his gaze and said nothing. It was Ysolda, the keep's healer, who broke the silence, sweeping in with a tray of bandages and a look that suggested she had dealt with far more stubborn patience than a half-starved girl with secrets in her eyes. "The king can wait for his answers," the old woman said briskly, setting the tray down. "This wound cannot wait for anything. Off with the blanket, girl. Let me see what those animals did to you." Era flinched at the word animals, and something passed behind Kaelan's eyes that she did not have the strength yet to name. He rose while Ysolda worked, moving to stand near the door instead of hovering, and Era noted that too, the way he gave her space without being asked, the way his eyes stayed on her face rather than anywhere else, careful in a manner she had not expected from a king who could apparently make grown wolves retreat with a single sound. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," he said finally, "but you will tell me eventually, because whatever Blackthorn wants with you badly enough to hunt you across a kingdom border, I intend to understand it before he tries again. And if I don't want your help?" "Then you'll have it anyway," Kaelan said, "until you're strong enough to walk out that door and tell me to my face that you don't need it." It was Ysolde, tugging carefully at the bandage along Era's ribs, who made the small, startled sound that pulled both their attention. "What?" Era said, suddenly wary again. The healer's fingers had stilled over a faint marking along Era's side, half hidden beneath the wound, a pattern of pale silver lines beneath the skin, delicate as frost on glass, visible only now that the surrounding flesh had been cleaned of blood. Era had seen it 1,000 times in her own mirror, and thought nothing of it. It had always simply been there, a birthmark, nothing more. Ysolda looked up, first at Era, then, slowly, at the king. "My king," she said carefully. "You should see this." Kaelan crossed the room in 3 strides and went very still. "That is a Wintermere mark," he said quietly. "I have not seen one in 20 years. I was told the last of that bloodline died in the fire that took their hold." Era's whole body went cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the winter outside. "Almost the last," she said, and for the first time since she had woken in this bed, her voice cracked. "My name is Era Wintermere, and you're right. Everyone was supposed to have died that night. I've spent 3 years making sure the world kept believing that." The fire popped softly in the silence that followed. Kaelan looked at her the way a man looks at a puzzle he has just realized is far larger and far older than he first believed. "You are not leaving my territory," he said again, and this time the words carried none of the fury from the forest, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. Not while Blackthorn still believes a dead girl is worth hunting. Era did not argue. For the first time in 3 years, some small, exhausted part of her did not want to. The scream came before the dawn bell, and it came from the training yard. Era was awake instantly. 3 years of running teaching her body to trust nothing, not even silence. She reached the window in time to see a young guard, a girl, barely past her own age, hair braided tight for combat, pinned beneath a much larger opponent during morning drills, laughing rather than crying out in pain. "You'll break my arm one day, Torvin," the girl shouted, shoving the captain off with a well-placed knee that made half the yard laugh. "Not before you learn to keep your guard up, Stonewell," Torvin called back, hauling her up by the wrist with easy affection. Era watched a moment longer than she meant to. It had been a long time since she'd seen people who trusted each other enough to fight for fun. "You're staring," said a voice from the doorway, and Era turned to find the same girl from the yard now standing there, damp with sweat, and grinning despite the bruise already forming along her jaw. "Dagny Stonewell, I'm to keep you company today, on the king's orders, also to make sure you don't wander somewhere you shouldn't." "A guard dressed as a friend," Era said. "A friend who happens to also be a guard," Dagny corrected, unbothered. "There's a difference, even if the king doesn't always see it that way." Despite herself, Era almost smiled. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her, without either fear or calculation behind their eyes, that Dagny's easy honesty felt disorienting, like stepping into sunlight after months underground. They walked the lower halls together that morning, Dagny narrating the keep's history with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the place, and Era found herself, cautiously, listening. She learned that Kaelin had ruled Scarrow for nearly 90 years, young for an alpha king by wolf standards, but seasoned enough that few dared test him twice. She learned that Torvin had served him since before either of them had grey in their hair. She learned that the keep's Lord Commander, a broad, quiet man named Bastian Vane, had once been the king's own swordmaster, and that half the guard still called him Old Bastian, with something close to reverence. It was that last name that made Dagny's easy chatter falter, just slightly. "What?" Era said, catching it immediately. 3 years of survival had sharpened her instincts for the things people didn't say as much as the things they did. "Nothing," Dagny said, too quickly. "Only, Commander Vane's been strange lately, sending ravens out at odd hours, ordering the rookery keeper to log nothing about who they're addressed to." She shrugged, uneasy. "Probably nothing. He's carried the weight of this whole keep on his back for years. A man's allowed a few strange habits." Sierra filed the information away without comment, the way she filed away everything now, a small, cold splinter of caution beneath the surface of a conversation that otherwise felt almost pleasant. That evening, Kaelin found her in the library, exactly where Dagny had predicted he would. "You've made an impression on my guard, Captain," he said, settling into the chair across from her without invitation, the way he had every evening since her wound had healed enough to let her leave her room. "He tells me you correct Torvin's sparring form from the window, and he's too proud to admit you're usually right." "I grew up watching my father train his own guard," Era said. "You pick things up." "Your father," Kaelin said carefully, "was Alaric Wintermere. I met him once, when I was young enough that my father still had to explain who everyone in the room was. He studied her. You don't talk about your family. There isn't much of it left to talk about. There's you," he said simply. Era looked up at that, something in her chest twisting at the plainness of it, the lack of pity in his voice. Most people who learned what had happened to Wintermere Vale either flinched away from her or leaned in too close, hungry for the details of tragedy, the way crows gather for anything left in a field. Kaelin did neither. He simply waited, patient in a way that made the silence feel less like a trap and more like an open door. "There was a fire," she said finally. 3 years ago, Blackthorn's men, though it took me a long time to be certain of that. My father, my mother, most of our pack, gone in a single night. Her hands had curled into fists in her lap without her noticing. I got my little brother out through the old grain tunnels. Finn. He was 7. Where is he now? Safe, Era said, and the word came out fiercer than she intended. Hidden with people I trust, far from anywhere Blackthorn thinks to look. I've kept it that way for 3 years by making sure no one, not even people I liked, ever knew exactly where. Something shifted behind Kaelin's pale eyes, something that looked almost like respect. And Blackthorn still hunts you, because as long as you live, your claim to Wintermere land outlives whatever he's built on top of its ashes. He hunts me, Era said quietly, because 3 years ago, before the fire, my father promised me to him in marriage to end an old border dispute. I said no the week before the flames took everything. I've always wondered if that's why he burned it, instead of simply waiting for a wedding. Her voice had gone very flat, very controlled, the way it always did when she spoke of things that still had teeth. A dead bride can't refuse him twice, but a living heir who says no in front of witnesses, that's a different kind of insult for a man like Garin Blackthorn to swallow. Kaelin was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped low, rough at the edges in a way she hadn't heard from him before. He will not have you, he said, not while I still draw breath in this hold. Idira should have laughed it off, should have reminded him that kings made promises like that all the time and rarely meant to keep them. Instead, something in his voice, plain, unpolished, entirely without performance, settled into her chest and stayed there, warm in a place that had been cold for 3 very long years. You don't even know me, she said softly. I'm working on that, Kaelin said. Every evening, in this library, whether you notice or not. Era did notice. She had noticed for weeks. She simply hadn't let herself say so out loud until now. The great hall doors slammed open hard enough to rattle the torches, and Era, seated at the edge of the council chamber where Kaelin had insisted she be present, felt every eye in the room turn toward her at once. My king, said Lord Howard, eldest of Scarrow's council, not bothering to soften his voice for the audience gathered. Word has reached us from 3 separate holds along the northern crossings. Garin Blackthorn has sent formal word. He demands the return of Era Wintermere, and he is prepared to call it an act of war if she is not delivered by the next full moon. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Era's pulse spiked, old fear rising fast and familiar, but she forced her spine straight, refusing to let the room see her flinch. Then he will have his war, Kaelin said flatly, because she is not leaving my territory. My king, with respect, Howard pressed. Scarrow has not fought a war on 2 fronts since your grandfather's time. Our southern border already strains under Ravenmere's grain tariffs. We cannot afford to bleed men defending a claim that is not ours to defend. She is under my protection, Kaelin said, each word carved from stone. That makes her claim mine to defend. Is it protection, said another voice, cooler, more measured, or is it something else entirely, my king? Era turned toward the speaker and found herself looking, for the first time properly, at Bastian Vane. He was a broad man, graying at the temples, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of controlling a room without needing to raise his voice. His eyes, when they landed on her, were not unkind, exactly, but there was a weight behind them, a careful calculation Era recognized instantly, because she had spent 3 years learning to spot exactly that look on people who were hiding something. Careful, Commander, Kaelin said, low and warning. I mean no disrespect to the lady, Bastian said smoothly, inclining his head toward Era with what looked, on the surface, like perfect courtesy. Only that a king's heart and a kingdom's safety do not always walk the same road, and it is my duty to remind him when they begin to part ways. He turned back to the council. Perhaps a compromise, a formal alliance, marriage between Alpha Blackthorn and the Wintermere heir would end the dispute over her father's lands without a single life lost on either side. Marriage to the man who burned her family alive, Kaelin said, his voice gone dangerously quiet. is not a compromise, Commander. It is a sentence. We do not know that Blackthorn ordered that fire, Bastian said carefully. Suspicion is not proof, my king. Ira's hands curled into fists beneath the table. She had lived 3 years with that exact argument thrown at her by people too comfortable, too far from the flames, to understand what certainty felt like when it lived in your bones instead of your evidence. I was there, she said, and her voice, though quiet, cut cleanly through the murmur that had begun to rise around the table. Every head turned toward her. I watched his colors on the banners the riders carried. I heard his name shouted by the men who set the grain stores alight. I do not need a signed confession to know whose hand lit that fire, my lord. I carried the smoke of it out through a tunnel with my 7-year-old brother on my back. The room went silent. Kalen looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and proud burning behind his pale eyes, and then turned back to his counsel with a finality that ended the discussion before it could continue. She does not leave my territory, he said again, the same words from the forest, from her sick room, now spoken in front of every lord in Scarrow. Prepare the border garrisons. If Blackthorn wants a war over a girl he already tried to burn out of existence once, I will not make him ask twice. The council dispersed slowly, murmuring, unsettled, and Bastian was the last to rise, his gaze lingering on Aira a beat too long before he offered a small, unreadable bow and left the chamber. Aira did not miss it. Neither, she noticed, did Kalen. They found their way to the tower later that night, the small hidden room above the western wing that Kalen had shown her only once before, its ceiling painted long ago with stars that no longer matched the sky outside. He said his grandmother had built it, a place where a king could simply be a man for an hour, with no one demanding anything of him at all. You didn't have to defend me like that, Aira said, settling onto the wide stone sill beneath the painted stars. In front of your whole council. I wasn't defending you, Kalen said. I was telling the truth. There's a difference, even if it looks the same from where you were sitting. Aira huffed something close to a laugh, surprising herself. You have a habit of saying things like that. Things that sound simple, and then sit in my chest for hours afterward. Good, he said, and there was warmth in it now, unguarded in a way his council chamber voice never was. I'd rather you carry my words around than forget them the moment you leave the room. She looked down at her own hands, at the place along her wrist where, for the past several days, she had noticed something strange. A faint warmth that came and went, always strongest when Kalen was near, fading almost to nothing when he left a room. She had told herself it was simply the healing wound. She was no longer certain that was true. Does it ever get warm? She asked slowly. Your skin, I mean, when I'm close. Kalen went very still. You feel that too, he said. It was not quite a question. Aira held up her wrist, and in the low candlelight, both of them watched as a faint, silvery mark bloomed briefly beneath her skin, pale as frost, gone again almost before it had fully formed. I don't know what it means, she admitted. I thought I was imagining it. I don't fully know either, Kalen said quietly, reaching for her hand, slow enough to give her every chance to pull away. She didn't. The old stories call it a moonfire mark. It's supposed to appear between two wolves whose bond the moon itself has chosen. I always thought it was exactly that. A story. Something told to pups to explain why some alphas refuse 100 good matches. And now, he said, his thumb brushing gently over the mark on her wrist, warmth blooming brighter beneath his touch. I'm no longer certain it's only a story. Aira's breath caught. Fear and something far softer tangled together in her chest. I don't know what to do with that, she said honestly. Neither do I, Kalen admitted, but I'd like to find out, slowly, however long it takes you to trust it. Aira looked at him for a long moment, at the careful, unhurried patience in his eyes, and found, for the first time in 3 long years, that trust did not feel quite so much like a door she had bolted shut for good. The kitchens erupted in laughter before dawn, and Aira, drawn from sleep by the sound, found herself smiling before she even understood why. She wandered down, still half-dressed for bed, to find Dagny balanced precariously on a table, reenacting some disastrous sparring match against Torvin the night before, while the kitchen staff howled with laughter around her. It was such a small, ordinary thing. Warmth, noise, people who liked each other enough to tease without cruelty. And Era stood in the doorway a long moment, simply absorbing it, the way a person starved for months might stand in front of a full table before remembering how to eat. "You're doing the staring thing again," Dagny called out, hopping down from the table with a grin. "I like it here," Era admitted, and the words surprised her as much as anyone. "I didn't expect to." Dagny's grin softened into something gentler. "It's allowed, you know. Liking a place, even after everything." Era didn't answer that directly, but she carried the thought with her through the rest of the morning, turning it over the way she once turned over her mother's old proverbs, testing whether it still held weight now that so much of her old life had burned away. It was that afternoon, walking the eastern gardens with Kaelin at her side, that she finally told him everything. Not the careful, guarded pieces she had offered before, but the whole shape of it, the parts she had never said aloud to anyone. "My father wanted peace," she said, watching frost-kissed flowers bend gently in the wind, blooming strangely, even under Scarrow's pale winter sun. Blackthorn's territory bordered ours on two sides, and the old feud between our packs went back generations. My father thought a marriage between our houses would end it for good. I was 17. I said yes because I didn't understand yet what it would cost me to say no. "But you did say no, eventually," Kaelin said. The week before the fire, Era's voice thinned, but she pushed through it. "Garen came to formalize things. I told him I wouldn't marry a man who looked at me the way a trader looks at land he already owns. I told him no, in front of his own advisors, and I watched something behind his eyes go very cold and very quiet." She swallowed hard. 7 days later, the fire started at midnight, while most of the pack slept. "I've never been able to prove he ordered it. I've never needed proof. I know what I saw in his eyes that day." Kaelin stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression carved from something fierce and careful all at once. "You got your brother out, through the old grain tunnels beneath the hold. I carried him 3 miles before my legs gave out, and a farmer's wife found us in her cellar the next morning, half frozen." Era's throat tightened. "I've kept him hidden ever since, moved him twice a year, never told anyone his location, not even people I trusted, because trust is a luxury I stopped being able to afford the night I watched my home burn." "Where is he now?" Kaelin asked gently. Ira hesitated only a moment before answering, and the fact that she hesitated at all, rather than refusing outright, told her something important about how far she had already come. "With a woodcutter named Bram and his wife Sella, near the eastern border of Duskmoor itself, hidden in plain sight, because I gambled Blackthorn would never think to look for Wintermere blood inside his own lands." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "That is dangerously close to him." "It was the last place he'd think to look," Era said. "Or it was, until his hunters caught my scent 3 days ago and chased me halfway across 2 kingdoms, trying to find out where I'd been hiding." The color drained slightly from Kaelin's face. "If they followed your trail that far, they may have found the direction I came from," Era finished, dread pooling cold in her stomach as the full shape of the danger settled over her. "Which means Finn may no longer be as hidden as I thought." Kaelin reached for both her hands, steady, despite the urgency now sharpening behind his eyes. "I will send riders quietly, tonight, to bring him somewhere safer, somewhere inside these walls, if that is what you want. You would do that, for a boy you've never met." "I would do that," Kaelin said, "because he is your family, and because I meant what I told my council. Whatever is yours to protect is mine to protect now, if you'll let it be." Something in Enera's chest, some old, carefully bricked-up wall, cracked further at that. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him despite the winter chill, close enough that the mark on her wrist bloomed bright and unmistakable between them. "I'm frightened," she admitted quietly. "Of this, of you. of how much I want to let myself believe in something good again, after 3 years of learning not to. So am I, Kaelan said, his voice rough with an honesty she hadn't expected from a king who could level a room with a single word. I've ruled this kingdom for 90 years, without ever once needing anyone, the way I find myself needing you. It terrifies me more than Blackthorn's entire warband. Era looked up at him, at the careful, unguarded want written plainly across his face, and closed the last small distance between them herself. The kiss was slow, careful, nothing like the desperate collision she might once have imagined from a king with a growl that sent warriors running. It was gentle in a way that made her chest ache, and beneath it, the mark on her wrist pulsed warm and steady, a quiet promise neither of them fully understood yet, but both, in that moment, chose to trust anyway. When they finally broke apart, Kaelan rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady in a way that made her feel, for the first time in years, powerful rather than powerless. "Stay," he murmured. "Not because Blackthorn hunts you, not because the moon marked us before either of us had a say. Stay, because some part of you wants to." "I'm staying," Era whispered, "for exactly that reason." Later, back in her own chamber, Era sat by candlelight and wrote a short, careful letter to Bram, the words chosen the way she chose everything now. Sparse, coded, giving away nothing to anyone who might intercept it along the road. "The wolves have grown curious about the woodcutter's trade. Keep the boy close to the fire until I send word otherwise." It was as close as she dared come to a warning, and she sealed it with trembling hands, hating that even now, even here, safety still felt like something she had to guard in whispers rather than trust out loud. She thought of Kaelan's mouth against hers, of the warmth still humming faintly along her wrist, and told herself that this, at least, was real. That a mark the moon itself had chosen did not care whether she was ready to believe in it. She only had to decide whether she was brave enough to stop bracing for it to be taken away. Neither of them could yet know how quickly that fragile, hard-won piece was about to be tested. The scream from the eastern courtyard cut the night in half, and Era was out of bed before she'd even fully understood why. It wasn't real danger. She realized that within seconds, following the sound to find Dagny doubled over laughing, while a very damp, very furious Torvin dripped from an ambush of well-aimed snowballs. But her pulse took longer to settle than the moment warranted, a reminder that 3 years of true danger did not simply switch off because the last few weeks had been kind. It was Kaelan who found her still standing at the window afterward, watching her own breath fog the glass. "You heard the alarm before there was one to hear," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Old habit," she admitted. "Hard to unlearn." He didn't press further. Instead, he reached for her hand, and this time, when their fingers laced together, the mark on her wrist flared to life immediately, brighter than it had ever burned before, and then, without warning, it burned. Era gasped, pulling back instinctively, staring down at her wrist, where the silver lines beneath her skin glowed sharp and hot, more painful than anything the healing warmth had prepared her for. "Era." Kaelan's voice was tight with alarm. His own palm marked the same way, his jaw clenched hard against what was clearly answering pain. It faded as quickly as it had come, leaving both of them breathing hard in the aftermath. "That's never happened before," Era said shakily. "No," Kaelan agreed, his expression troubled in a way she hadn't seen from him since the council chamber. "The old stories say the mark burns like that for one reason, when something threatens to break the bond before it's finished settling." He looked at her, worry sharpening every line of his face. "Something is wrong. I don't yet know what." He was still turning that thought over hours later, alone in his study, when Torvin arrived with news that gave the warning a shape. "My king," Torvin said, closing the door carefully behind him. "I don't like bringing you rumor without proof, but I think it's past time you heard this. Bastian's been meeting a rider near the old mill house 3 nights running. Not one of ours. The stable master recognized the horse. Duskmore breeding, my king. Blackthorn stock. Kaelin went very still. You're certain? Certain enough to trouble my sleep, Torvin said grimly. I trained under that man for 20 years. I don't want it to be true any more than you do. Watch him, Kaelin said after a long, heavy silence. Quietly. I want proof before I accuse the man who taught me to hold a blade of treason against my own crown. And if the proof comes... Kaelin's jaw tightened, old loyalty warring visibly with the cold new dread settling in his chest. Then I will do what a king must, regardless of what it costs the boy who once looked up to him. Era did not hear any of that conversation, but she felt its weight anyway, the way a person feels a storm gathering long before the first drop of rain falls. Kaelin had grown quieter over supper, distracted in a way that pulled at the thread between them, and rather than sit alone with her own worry, she found her way to the training yard, where Dagny was drilling a line of younger recruits through their morning forms. You look like a woman who needs to hit something, Dagny said, tossing her a wooden practice blade without waiting for an answer. Era caught it out of reflex, old muscle memory from a childhood spent watching her father's guard surfacing before she'd consciously decided to let it. Is it that obvious? You've been pacing the same stretch of corridor for 3 days, Dagny said, falling into an easy stance across from her. Torvin's noticed too, and he notices considerably less than he thinks he does. They traded slow, careful strikes, more conversation than combat, and somewhere in the rhythm of it, Era found the knot in her chest loosening enough to speak. Do you ever wonder about Commander Vane's daughter? She asked, keeping her voice light, testing the question the way she might test ice, before trusting her full weight to it. You mentioned once she'd gone east. It's been months. Something flickered across Dagny's face, not suspicion exactly, but the particular carefulness of someone who had noticed the same strange gap and hadn't known what to do with it. Now that you say it, she admitted, lowering her blade, I can't remember the last time anyone in the kitchens mentioned a letter from her. Ellen used to write every fortnight, without fail. My mother used to read them aloud like gossip. She frowned. Strange, that it stopped and no one thought to ask why. Yura said nothing, but she filed the observation away carefully beside everything else. The torn scrap of parchment, the Duskmore horse at the mill house, the tightness around Bastion's eyes whenever Blackthorn's name entered a room. Separately, each piece could be explained away. Together, they were beginning to form a shape she did not want to look at directly. Not yet, not until she was certain. You're doing the staring thing again, Dagny said gently, echoing her own words from weeks before. I think, Era said slowly, I'm starting to understand something I'd rather not. Era found Bastion in the rookery 2 nights later, quite by accident, having gone up herself to check on a raven she'd taken a liking to during her recovery, a habit Dagny teased her for relentlessly. She froze in the doorway when she saw him bent over the message table, a small, sealed scroll in his hand, his expression tight with something that looked, unmistakably, like guilt. Lady Era, he said, straightening quickly, the scroll disappearing into his sleeve with practiced ease. Forgive me, I didn't expect anyone else up here at this hour. Neither did I, Era said carefully, her instincts prickling with the same cold, familiar warning that had once kept her alive through months of running. Sending a message so late, Commander? Kingdom business, he said smoothly, though something behind his eyes did not match the ease in his voice. A commander's duties rarely respect the hour, my lady. You'll want to be careful up here yourself. The steps are treacherous in the dark. He was gone before she could press further, his footsteps unhurried on the stairs, deliberately calm in a way that struck Era, in hindsight, as far more unsettling than if he'd simply run. She waited until she was certain he was gone, before crossing to the message table herself, and there, tucked half beneath a stack of ordinary correspondence, she found a single torn scrap of parchment, the corner of a message he'd clearly meant to burn rather than leave behind. Only 3 words remained legible on the torn edge, but they were enough to turn her blood to ice. The boy. Confirmed. Era stood frozen in the cold rookery air, the scrap trembling in her fingers, and understood with terrible, sudden clarity exactly what danger the burning mark had been trying to warn them about. Someone inside these walls already knew where Finn was hidden. Aira did not sleep that night. She sat in the tower beneath the painted stars, the torn scrap of parchment pressed flat against her palm, turning the same 3 words over and over until they had worn a groove into her thoughts. The boy, confirmed. Kaelin found her there near dawn, his face going pale the moment she showed him what she'd found. "That's Bastian's hand," he said quietly, tracing the jagged, familiar script. "I'd know it anywhere. He taught me my letters before he ever taught me to hold a sword." "It doesn't prove where he sent it," Aira said, though her voice shook with the effort of trying to sound reasonable when every instinct in her was screaming otherwise. "No," Kaelin agreed grimly. But Torvin already suspected him. Duskmoor riders. Secret meetings by the old mill house, and now this. He closed his fist around the parchment, jaw tight with a grief that had nowhere honest to go yet. "I need to know for certain before I move against him, Aira. Bastian trained me. He held this kingdom steady, more times than I can count. If I'm wrong, and if you're right," Aira said, "and you wait too long to be certain, my brother pays the price for your hesitation." The words landed harder than she meant them to, and she watched something crack behind Kaelin's controlled expression. "You're right," he said finally. "Forgive me. I've spent 90 years learning to move carefully. That instinct is going to get someone I love killed if I let it slow me down now." Someone I love. The words hung between them, unplanned and unpolished, and neither of them stopped to examine them too closely, because there was no time left for anything but action. Dara felt them settle into her chest anyway, quiet and enormous, a truth spoken sideways in the middle of a crisis, because there had never once been a safe, ordinary moment to say it plainly. Kaelin summoned Torvin within the hour, and the 3 of them met in the map room, doors barred, voices low. "I confronted the rookery keeper," Torvin said grimly. "Under my own authority, my king. Forgive me for not waiting on yours." He confirmed it. "Commander Vane has been sending sealed messages north for 3 months. Always at night, always destroyed after sending. The keeper only kept quiet, because Bastian threatened his family's position if he spoke of it." 3 months, Kaelin repeated, something hollow entering his voice. "Since before Aira ever crossed our border." "There's more," Torvin said, and something in his tone made both of them go still. "I did some digging of my own after you gave the order, my king. Discreetly. Bastian's daughter, Elin. She left the keep to visit kin in the east almost 4 months ago." He hesitated. "No letters have come from her since. Not one. Her father's told the household she's simply enjoying her travels." Aira's stomach dropped. "You think Blackthorn has her?" "I think," Torvin said carefully, "that a man like Bastian Vane does not sell out 90 years of loyalty for coin or ambition. He sells it out for something he's more afraid of losing than his own honor." Kaelin sank into the nearest chair, the weight of it settling visibly over his shoulders. If Blackthorn holds his daughter, then everything Bastian has done, the messages, the meetings, all of it, has been under threat, not choice. "That does not make it forgivable," Aira said quietly, though there was less anger in her voice now than there had been an hour ago. "But it does make it understandable. I know what it is to do impossible things to protect the people you love." Kaelin looked at her for a long moment, something painful and complicated moving behind his pale eyes. "I need to speak with him, tonight, before this goes any further than it already has." "He'll deny it," Torvin warned. "Or worse, he'll run and warn Blackthorn we're onto him before we can stop it." "Then we don't give him the chance to do either," Kaelin said, rising, his voice hardening into the tone of a king rather than a grieving student. "Torvin, quietly gather 6 men you trust with your life." "Aira, I'm coming with you," she said, before he could finish the thought. "Aira, this could be dangerous. So was the forest, where you found me bleeding," she said steadily. "I am done being kept safely out of my own war, Kaelin. Whatever Bastian knows about Finn, I need to hear it directly, not second-hand through a door." Kaelin studied her for a long moment, and whatever he saw in her face settled the argument before it could fully begin. "Together then," he said, "as it should have been from the start." They walked the corridor toward Bastian's chambers in silence, torchlight throwing long shadows against the stone, and Ira could feel the tension radiating off Kaelin with every step. Not the fury she'd seen him wear in the forest, but something quieter and harder to carry, the particular grief of a man about to lose one more piece of the family he had left. "He carried me on his shoulders once," Kaelin said quietly, not quite to her, more to the empty hall around them. "The day my mother died, I was too small to understand what had happened, and he simply picked me up and carried me the length of this keep so I wouldn't have to walk past the room where they'd laid her. I was 7 years old. I don't think I've ever told anyone that." "You don't have to do this alone," Ira said, reaching for his hand. "I know," Kaelin said, and the warmth of the mark answered instantly, steady beneath both their palms. "That's the only reason I still can." They found Bastian in his private chambers an hour before midnight, the old commander seated alone at his writing desk, a half-finished letter beneath his hand. He did not look surprised to see them. If anything, something in his weathered face looked almost relieved, as though he had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment to finally arrive. "My king," he said quietly, setting down his quill, "I assume you're not here to discuss border patrols." "Where is my brother?" Ira said before Kaelin could speak, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And where is your daughter, Commander? Because I don't think those two questions have separate answers anymore." Something in Bastian's carefully composed face, finally, completely, broke. "Elin has been held at Blackthorn's border keep for 4 months, Bastian said, and his voice, always so steady in council, shook on every word. "Garen's men took her from the Eastern Road while she traveled to visit her aunt. They sent me proof within the week, her ring, a lock of her hair, and a message telling me exactly what would happen to her if I did not begin sending them information about this keep." Kaelin's hands had curled into fists at his sides, grief and fury tangled together so tightly neither of them could speak first. "You should have come to me," he said finally, his voice rough. "The moment they took her, Bastian, I would have moved every soldier in Scarrow to bring her home, and risk her life, the instant Blackthorn realized I'd disobeyed him." Bastian's laugh was hollow, broken. "I raised you on the belief that a leader protects what is his, no matter the cost to himself. I was only ever trying to do the same for her. By selling out the boy who trusted you with his kingdom," Ira said, though there was no real heat left in her voice, only exhaustion and something close to grief on Bastian's behalf. "Did you know what your information would cost? Did you know Blackthorn's hunters would nearly kill me finding it?" Bastian's face crumpled. "I told myself it was only information about troop movements, border patrols, nothing that could truly harm anyone." His voice broke entirely. "It wasn't until 3 days ago that they demanded I confirm the location of a boy hidden near Duskmoor's eastern edge. I didn't know until then that the information I'd been feeding them for months had led them straight to your brother's trail, Lady Ira. I swear to you, I did not know." "But you confirmed it anyway," Kaelin said quietly. "Once they asked." Bastian's silence was answer enough. "They said it was the last thing they'd ask of me," he whispered. "That Ellen would be returned the moment I confirmed the boy's location. I believed them because I needed to believe them. I am not proud of that weakness, my king, but I will not pretend it wasn't real." The room fell into heavy silence, grief and fury, and something achingly close to understanding all tangled together in equal measure. Ira thought of her own 3 years of impossible choices, of every rule she had broken and every trust she had abandoned in the name of keeping Finn alive, and found, despite everything, that she could not fully hate the broken man in front of her. "What happens now, my king?" Bastian asked quietly, "is entirely your judgment to make. I will not run. I will not fight it. Whatever price my crown demands, I will pay it." Ira stepped closer, studying the old commander's face, seeing in it something she recognized far too well, the particular exhaustion of a person who had spent months carrying a secret too heavy to set down, terrified that the moment they did, everything they loved would fall with it. "I understand it better than you might think," she said quietly. "I lied to my own brother for 3 years about why we kept moving, why we never stayed anywhere long enough to make friends, why I flinched at every stranger's face. I told myself it was to protect him. Some days it was only to protect myself from having to explain the truth out loud." She held Bastian's gaze. "That doesn't make what you did right, Commander, but it means I understand exactly what it cost you to do it." Something in Bastian's throat worked, and for a moment, Era thought the old soldier might weep in front of them both. "Thank you, my lady," he said hoarsely. "For that, if nothing else." He pressed a trembling hand briefly against his chest, as though steadying a heart that had carried its secret alone for far too long. And for the first time since she had found him in the rookery, Era saw not a traitor in front of her, but simply a tired, frightened father who had run out of good choices months ago. Kalen said nothing, but his jaw had unclenched slightly, some of the coiled fury in his shoulders easing into something closer to grief that had finally found somewhere honest to rest. Before Kalen could answer, the door burst open, and a breathless rider staggered in, still in his travel cloak, snow melting off his shoulders in the warmth of the room. "My king," the rider gasped. "Forgive the intrusion." Riders spotted Blackthorn's warband crossing the northern pass at dusk, full battle formation. "They'll reach our border garrisons by first light." He hesitated, throat working. "There's more, my king." A second, smaller party split off toward the eastern woods near Duskmoor's edge. Scouts confirmed they're moving on a woodcutter's camp. Era's blood went cold. "Finn, they've had the location for days," Bastian said, his voice hollow with horror at what his own weakness had set in motion. "They were only waiting for the larger force to be in position before they moved." "My king, I am so sorry." "Save your apologies," Kalen said, already moving, his voice hardening into the unshakable authority of a king facing war on 2 fronts at once. "Torvin, ready every rider we can spare within the hour. We split our forces. I lead a party east to the woodcutter's camp myself. You hold the castle and the northern approach with everyone else we have. My king, if you ride out personally while the castle stands exposed." "I know the risk," Kalen said grimly. "But I will not send other men to save what is mine, while I hide safely behind these walls." He turned to Bastian, something fierce and unforgiving settling into his gaze. "You will ride with me, Commander. If Blackthorn's men are near that camp, you know their formations, their signals, their weaknesses better than any soldier in this keep. Earn back a fraction of what you've cost us tonight, and we will discuss the rest of your judgment once every person we love is safely behind these walls again." Caught again. Bastian's eyes shone with something raw and grateful. "Yes, my king. Whatever you ask." "And Era," Kalen said, turning to her, his expression softening only slightly despite the urgency crackling through the room. "You're coming with me. I won't leave you behind these walls, not knowing whether your brother lives or dies tonight." Era nodded, fear and fierce, protective fury burning equally bright in her chest. "Then let's ride," she said, "before Blackthorn finishes what he started 3 years ago." The forest near Duskmoor's edge was already burning when they arrived, thin trails of smoke curling up from a woodcutter's cottage in the near distance, and Era felt something inside her chest crack wide open at the sight of it. "Finn," she breathed, already sliding from her horse before it had fully stopped. "Era, wait." Kalen caught her arm, urgency sharp in his voice. "We go in together. Careful. Blackthorn wants you as badly as the boy. Do not give him an easy shot at either of you." They moved through the trees in wolf form, fast and silent, Dagny leading the small guard Torvin had hand-picked before staying behind to hold the castle. Era caught the scent of smoke and fear, and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, the scent of her brother, alive, terrified, but alive. They found him in the root cellar beneath the cottage, hidden exactly where Bram had promised he would keep him safe, the woodcutter and his wife standing fierce guard at the entrance with nothing but farm tools in their trembling hands. "Era!" Finn's voice broke on her name the moment she shifted back and pulled him into her arms, and for one suspended heartbeat, nothing else in the world mattered at all. It could not stay that way for long. Miles to the west, Iron Hollow Keep was already under siege. Torvin Ash stood atop the northern wall as the horns sounded across the frozen fields, watching Blackthorn's warband spill out of the tree line in numbers large enough to blot out the horizon behind them. He had known this moment was coming since the rider's warning 3 nights past, and he had spent every hour since preparing for exactly it, reinforcing the gate, doubling the archers, calling in every able-bodied wolf from the outlying farms who could still hold a blade or bear a fang. "Hold the wall," he called down the line, his voice carrying easily over the rising wind. "Let them break themselves against it before we ever open that gate." The first wave crashed against Iron Hollow's defenses within the hour, and it was ugly, close, desperate fighting, wolves and men both, the snow at the base of the wall turning red, the way it always did when 2 packs settled a border with blood instead of words. But Torvin had trained half the guard standing on that wall himself, and preparation this time proved sharper than numbers. Blackthorn's warband had come expecting a castle caught unaware. They found one that had been waiting for them for 3 days. By the second hour, the attackers' formation had begun to fracture, their commanders shouting conflicting orders as the defenders held their ground far longer than any raiding party had budgeted for. By the third, what remained of the warband broke and scattered back toward the tree line, leaving their dead in the snow and whatever pride they'd carried into it somewhere behind them. Torvin did not stay to celebrate. He sent riders in 3 directions the moment the gate could safely open again: north to the crossings, west to the nearest allied hold, and east toward the woodcutter's camp, carrying 4 words he prayed would still find someone alive to hear them. "The castle held. Come home." "Touching," said a voice from the tree line, cold and achingly familiar. "I've waited 3 years to see this reunion, Era. I confess, I imagined it would end rather differently." Garin Blackthorn stepped into the clearing with a dozen warriors at his back, tall and broad, his dark eyes fixed on Era, with the same possessive hunger she remembered from the week before her family's hold had burned. "Garin," she said, pushing Finn behind her without thinking, every instinct screaming protection. "You could have simply married me," Blackthorn said, almost gently, as though the years and the fire and the blood between them were nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding. None of this needed to happen. Not the fire, not the hunters, not whatever fragile little arrangement you've built with a king who won't survive tonight to enjoy it. "You'll have to go through me first," Kalen said, stepping forward, his voice low and dangerous, the wolf already stirring visibly beneath his skin. "I intend to," Blackthorn said, and the clearing erupted into chaos. Warriors clashed in wolf form and human alike, snow churning red beneath the fighting, Dagny's riders holding their own against Blackthorn's larger numbers through sheer, practiced skill. Somewhere to her left, Era heard Dagny's battle cry cut short by a snarl and prayed, with everything left in her, that it meant the girl had simply changed shape rather than fallen. There was no time to look. There was only the next breath, the next choice, the next small piece of the people she loved that still needed protecting. Era shoved Finn back toward Bram and Sella, screaming at them to run, to get him into the trees and not stop until they reached the horses. And then Blackthorn's blade was already swinging toward her, faster than she could fully process. Kalen moved between them before the blade could land, and the sound that tore out of him as the steel caught his shoulder instead of her chest was not remotely human. The change came over him violently, uncontrolled, grief and fury and love tangled together so completely that his wolf rose without permission, without restraint, silver-black fur, eyes burning molten gold, a sound rolling out of his throat that made even Blackthorn's warriors falter mid-strike. "You should not have touched her," Kalen said, voice dropped into something barely recognizable as words at all. Blackthorn, to his credit, did not run. He raised his blade again, prepared to meet whatever came next, but 3 years of comfortable power had made him slow in ways 90 years of discipline had never made Kalen. The fight that followed was brutal, fast, more instinct than strategy. Years of restrained fury, finally given a target worth unleashing on. Era watched, frozen, torn between terror and something fiercer, until she felt it. The same warmth from her wrist, blazing now up her entire arm, and beneath it, something ancient, stirring in her own blood, that she had never once felt before. The Wintermere bloodline could shift, she remembered suddenly, an old story her father used to tell, dismissed for years as nothing more than legend. Not every wolf line loses that gift, even in exile. She did not decide to change. Her body simply answered a call. 3 years of grief had buried deep enough she'd forgotten it existed. Silver-white fur, dappled with pale frost markings, exactly like the mark on her skin, and for the first time since the fire took everything from her, Era Wintermere stood in her true wolf form, fast and fierce, throwing herself into the fight at Kalen's side. Blackthorn's eyes widened with something close to fear at the sight of her. Proof, undeniable and impossible to burn away this time, that the bloodline he'd tried so hard to erase had survived him after all. It was Bastian, breaking from the tree line with a fury that looked very much like a man trying to earn back everything he'd lost, who finally brought Blackthorn down, pinning him hard against the frozen ground while Dagny's riders closed the circle around what remained of his scattered warriors. Kalen stood over him, chest heaving, gold still burning in his eyes, and for one long, terrible moment, Era was not certain the king in front of her could still hear anything beyond the roar of his own fury. "Kalen," she said, shifting back to human, stepping close, despite Dagny's warning hand on her arm. "Look at me, he's beaten. Don't let him take anything else from you tonight, not even this." Slowly, the gold in Kalen's eyes dimmed, and the man beneath the fury surfaced again, breathing hard, blood soaking through the wound at his shoulder. "Bind him," Kalen ordered, voice rough but steady again. "He answers to both our councils for every life he's taken, Scarrow's, and whatever remains of Wintermere's." Blackthorn said nothing, defeated and silent, and somewhere behind them, Finn's small, relieved sob broke the last of the tension in the clearing. Era turned, and there he was, her brother, alive, whole, running back into her arms with Bram and Sela close behind, the family she had spent 3 years protecting, standing together at last, in the fading light of a battle finally, truly over. She held him tightly, feeling his small heart hammering against her own, and over his shoulder, she watched Dagny limp out from between the trees, bloodied but grinning, one arm slung across a young rider's shoulder for support, and felt the last of her fear, finally, fully let go. The snow around them was churned red and grey with the wreckage of the fight, but the cold no longer felt like the enemy it had been 3 years ago in a burning hold. It simply felt like winter, ordinary and survivable, now that everyone she loved was still breathing in it. "You're bleeding," Finn said, pulling back to look at her properly, his young face creased with worry that no child his age should still know how to wear so easily. "So is he," Era said, glancing toward Kalen, who was already crossing the clearing toward them, favoring his wounded shoulder, but walking on his own strength. "We'll mend. That's the part that matters." Kalen reached them and knelt, meeting Finn's wide, uncertain eyes at his own level, rather than looming over him the way most grown wolves did without meaning to. "You must be the boy your sister nearly burned down 2 kingdoms to protect," he said gently. "I've heard a great deal about you." Finn studied him for a long moment, the particular careful assessment of a child who had learned, far too young, exactly how dangerous grown men could be. And then, slowly, he smiled. "Era says you're a king," he said. "You don't look much like one right now." Kalen laughed, low and honest, blood and snow still clinging to him. "No," he agreed. "I suppose tonight I don't." A rider broke from the tree line before the laugh had fully faded, horse lathered white, and for one sharp moment, every wolf still standing in the clearing turned toward the sound, hands finding hilts out of pure instinct. But the rider was one of Torvin's own, and the message he carried gasped out before he'd even fully reined in, unknotted something in Kaelin's chest that had been coiled tight since the moment they'd split their forces. "My king," Iron Hollow held. The warband broke against the wall by the 3rd hour. Captain Ash sends word the castle is secure and asks only that you all come home. Ira felt the last of the night's fear finally leave her all at once, her knees nearly giving out with the relief of it. Kaelin pulled her against his good shoulder, Finn tucked between them, and for a long moment none of them said anything at all, because nothing needed saying. They had all come home. That, tonight, was enough. The council chamber at Iron Hollow Keep had never held so much silence at once. Bastian stood before it, 3 days later, straight back despite everything, awaiting judgment for a betrayal born of a father's desperate love rather than ambition. Aira sat beside Kaelin, Finn close at her side, watching the man who had nearly cost her everything, with a complicated grief she had not expected to feel. "You endangered this kingdom," Kaelin said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "You endangered the woman I love, and the boy who has already lost more than any child should ever be asked to bear." He paused, and something in his expression softened just slightly. "You also spent 90 years protecting this hold, with a loyalty I have never once had cause to doubt until these last months. And you fought bravely to bring my mate's brother home safely, at real risk to your own life." Bastian said nothing, waiting. "Ellen was recovered from Blackthorn's border keep 2 days ago," Kaelin continued, and a visible tremor ran through the older man's composed frame. "She is safe. She is on her way home now." Bastian's knees nearly buckled, relief and grief crashing through him all at once. "You are stripped of your rank as Lord Commander," Kaelin said. "That cannot be undone. What you did, regardless of the reason behind it, has consequences you must carry. But you will remain in this keep, training the next generation of guards under Torvin's command, and you will spend whatever years remain to you, earning back the trust you nearly cost this kingdom everything to lose." "That is more mercy than I dared hope for, my king," Bastian said, his voice breaking. "Thank you." "Thank Ira," Kaelin said quietly. "It was her argument that convinced me a father's desperation and a traitor's ambition are not always the same crime, even when they wear the same face." Bastian turned to her, bowing low, and Ira nodded, something in her chest finally settling, after weeks of carrying anger she no longer needed. Ellen Vane arrived at Iron Hollow's gates 2 days later, thin and pale from months of captivity, but standing on her own feet, and Ira watched from the courtyard as Bastian crossed the frozen ground faster than a man his age had any business moving, pulling his daughter into his arms as though he meant never to let go of her again. "Papa," Ellen said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "You're shaking." "I have been shaking for 4 months," Bastian admitted, his composure finally completely gone. "I am allowed a little longer yet." Ira turned away to give them the moment, and found Kaelin watching the same reunion with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something soft and unguarded, a king letting himself simply feel glad for another man's joy, without the weight of the crown pressing down on it. "You did that," Ira said quietly, slipping her hand into his. "Whatever mercy you showed him, this is what it bought." "We did that," Kaelin corrected, echoing her own words back to her with a small, private smile. "I'm only just beginning to understand how much easier this crown sits when I stop insisting on carrying it alone." That evening, the mark on Ira's wrist had stopped burning entirely. She noticed it first in the tower, beneath the painted stars, Kaelin's hand resting over hers exactly where the silver lines lived beneath her skin. It glowed now, warm and steady and entirely without pain, the way it had the very first night he'd touched it, except deeper now, surer, as though whatever danger had once threatened to unravel the bond had finally, fully passed. "It's settled," Kaelin said softly, wonder plain in his voice. I think it settled the moment I chose to fight beside you instead of running, Era said. Not because the mark demanded it, because I wanted to. Finn's laughter drifted up faintly from the courtyard below, where Dagny had apparently decided teaching a 10-year-old to throw snowballs with proper form was a training priority worth Torvin's exasperated supervision. Kira smiled at the sound of it, warm and unguarded in a way she hadn't let herself be in 3 long years. He's happy here, she said. He's safe here, Kaelin corrected gently. Happiness tends to follow safety, given enough time. Is that what happened to you? Era asked, turning to face him fully. 90 years of ruling alone, and then a bleeding, half-frozen stranger drops into your forest and turns your entire kingdom on its head. Something like that, Kaelin admitted, a rare, easy smile breaking across his face. Though I'd argue, you did rather more than simply drop into my forest. You reshaped it, and me, if I'm honest. Era stepped closer, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the steady, familiar rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. I came into your territory, certain I would either die running or die fighting. I never imagined I might simply find somewhere worth staying instead. Stay then, Kaelin said, his voice low and certain, echoing words he'd spoken weeks ago in a very different kind of fear. Not because Blackthorn is gone, not because the mark ties us together whether we will it or not. Stay because it's what you choose, freely, with nothing left forcing your hand. I choose it, Era said, and meant it with everything she had left to give. I choose you, Kaelin Draven. Not the king, the man who carried a bleeding, frightened stranger through the snow, and never once asked what it would cost him to care. He kissed her, then, slow and certain, the warmth of the mark between them no longer a mystery either of them feared, but a promise, freely made and freely kept. Their moon ceremony was held beneath open sky 3 months later, when the last hard frost had finally begun to soften into spring. The Scarrow's court gathered in the eastern gardens, where frost flowers had once bloomed strangely under winter's twilight, now replaced by the first green shoots of a season. Neither of them had been fully certain they would live to see together. Finn stood at Era's side, in place of the father who could not, solemn and proud in a way that made her throat tighten with a grief that no longer had teeth, only tenderness. Dagny wept openly through the entire ceremony, and blamed it loudly on the wind. Torvin pretended not to notice the state of his own eyes. Bastian and Ellen stood together near the front, hand in hand, 2 people who had clawed their way back from the same fear and found each other whole on the other side of it. When Kaelin bound their wrists together before the assembled court, the moonfire mark beneath both their palms blazed bright enough that several of the younger guards gasped audibly, and Era laughed. A real, unguarded sound, the kind she had not let herself make in the 3 long years before a wolf king found her bleeding in his snow. I love you, Kaelin said, quiet enough that it was meant for her alone, though the whole garden had gone still to hear it anyway. I have since the moment you looked at me in that clearing, with nothing left to fear. I love you too, Era said, and the words settled into place, exactly the way the mark had. Warm, certain, entirely her own choice. I came looking for somewhere to survive. I never imagined I'd find somewhere to belong instead. 1 year later, Iron Hollow Keep had changed in ways few who remembered its coldest winter could have predicted. Finn had grown a full head taller, training each morning in the yard alongside Dagny with a determination that made even Torvin proud. His laughter no longer edged with the fear that had followed him through 3 years of hiding. Bastian, quieter now, humbler, had earned back enough trust that Torvin trusted him to train new recruits, and his daughter Ellen had settled into the keep's healing hall under Ysolda's careful guidance, the 2 vain women slowly rebuilding what fear had nearly cost them. Blackthorn's territory, stripped of its alpha and placed under careful watch by a council of his own surviving lords, had signed the first honest peace treaty Scarrow's northern border had seen in generations. One built, this time, on truth rather than threat. And in the tower beneath the painted stars, Era Wintermere, now Era Draven, Queen of Scarrow, stood beside her husband, and watched the first true snow of winter drift gently past the window, the silver mark on her wrist glowing warm and steady beneath her skin. "You're thinking too loudly again," Kaylin murmured against her hair, the old familiar warmth of the bond humming quietly between them. "I can feel it, even now." "Just grateful," Era said softly, "for all of it, even the parts that nearly broke me." "Especially those," Kaylin agreed, pulling her closer, "because they're the reason we know exactly how much this piece is worth holding on to." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and unhurried, over a kingdom that had finally, after everything, learned to be warm. Thanks for staying with me until the very end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think it all ended? See you in the next one.